Why didn't Alexander the Great conquer Rome? He built an empire stretching from Greece to India. He crushed the mighty Persian Empire, took Egypt without a fight, and even challenged the warriors of the Hindu Kush. Yet he never set foot in Rome. Why? Alexander seemed unstoppable. His army was the most disciplined force of its time, led by a man whose tactical brilliance was unmatched. If Rome had faced him, could it have survived? But Rome never became his target. There are 3 key reasons for that, reasons that shaped the course of history. First, Rome wasn't worth conquering, at least not yet. Second, Alexander had a different mission, one that had nothing to do with Italy. And third, his untimely death cut his ambitions short before he could ever turn west. Each of these reasons is crucial. Separately, they explain why Rome remained untouched. Together, they show why Alexander's empire would never reach the Tiber. Let's start with the first question. Was Rome even worth his attention? When we think of Rome, we picture the vast empire that ruled the Mediterranean. But in Alexander's time, Rome was nothing like that. It wasn't a powerful empire. It wasn't a major cultural or military force. It wasn't even the strongest city in Italy. In 336 BCE, when Alexander took the throne, Rome was still a small republic, struggling for dominance over the Italian peninsula. It had been fighting local wars for decades, but it had no influence beyond Italy. The real superpower in the West was Carthage, not Rome. To put things in perspective, when Alexander was defeating the Persian king Darius III and marching into Egypt, Rome was busy fighting the Samnites, a mountain people from central Italy. It was a tough fight for Rome, but on the global stage it was insignificant. Compared to the cities of Greece, Egypt, and Persia, Rome was just another regional power. Even if Alexander had looked west, he had much bigger targets. Sicily was controlled by the powerful city of Syracuse. Carthage dominated trade in the Mediterranean. Even the Celts in Gaul would have been a more tempting challenge than Rome. At best, Rome was a minor city-state, with an army of farmers who fought on foot. And there was another problem. Rome was not part of the world Alexander cared about. His entire campaign was focused on the Greek world and its enemies. The Romans were not Greek, they were foreigners. Unimportant, irrelevant. Alexander wasn't just a conqueror. He was following a plan, one set in motion long before he was born. His father, Philip II of Macedon, had spent years preparing for a war against Persia, the great empire that had once threatened Greece. This was not just a military campaign, it was a mission of revenge, a way to unite the Greek world against a common enemy. In 334 BCE, when Alexander crossed into Asia, he wasn't looking to expand randomly. He was carrying out his father's vision. Persia had invaded Greece over a century earlier. It had burned Athens. It had nearly crushed the city-states. Alexander was there to make sure that never happened again. He was not just fighting for land, he was fighting to erase the Persian threat forever. This is why he marched east instead of west. Greece had a long history of wars with Persia, but no connection to Rome. The Romans had never attacked Greece. They had never threatened Macedon. They weren't part of the story. If Alexander had turned west, he would have been fighting a war with no purpose, against an enemy no one in Greece cared about. And it wasn't just about war. Alexander wanted to spread Greek culture across the world. He built new cities, most of them named after himself, to create a lasting legacy of Hellenistic civilization. Persia, Egypt, and India were places where Greek culture could thrive. Rome was not. By the time he reached India, he had spent years fighting, building, and ruling. His men were exhausted. They had marched thousands of miles, crossed deserts, and fought in brutal battles. When they reached the edge of the known world, they refused to go further. It wasn't just about war fatigue. The mission was complete. Persia was gone. The East had been conquered. There was nothing left to fight for. But if Alexander had lived longer, would he have eventually turned west? Maybe. But fate had other plans. Alexander was only 32 years old when he died. He had never lost a battle. He had built an empire that stretched from Greece to India, but he never had the chance to rule it. In 323 BCE, after returning to Babylon, he fell suddenly ill. Within days, he was dead. No one knows for sure what killed him. Some say it was poison. Others believe it was malaria, typhoid, or even an autoimmune disease. Whatever the cause, his death ended any chance of further conquest. But what if he had lived? Would Rome have been his next target? It's possible. After all, Alexander had no intention of stopping. He'd already planned new campaigns. He spoke of conquering Arabia, securing the Western Mediterranean, and expanding his rule even further. His generals knew that as long as he was alive, the war would never end. But Rome still wouldn't have been an obvious choice. Carthage was the dominant power in the West. A war with Carthage would have made more sense. Controlling its vast trade network would have been a major prize. Rome, by comparison, was still a regional power. Even if Alexander had turned west, it's likely he would have focused on richer, more influential territories before considering Italy. And there's another problem. After his death, his empire didn't last. His generals, men who had fought alongside him for years, tore it apart. They divided his lands into rival kingdoms. The dream of a united empire died with him. Even if Alexander had conquered Rome, there's no guarantee it would have mattered. His empire was too vast, too unstable. So in the end, Rome was left untouched. Not because it was too powerful, but because Alexander's story ended before he could even consider it. And yet, history is full of irony. Just a few centuries later, Rome would do what Alexander never did. It would march east, conquer Greece, and claim Macedon for itself. Alexander never saw Rome as a threat, but Rome would outlive him, rise to power, and shape the world in ways even he could not have imagined.